Hi, my name is Pragnia,
Hi, my name's Jennifer.
and today we'll be talking about the US foreign policy over the 20th century. As the 20th century progressed, the US foreign policy edged towards more action, often involving participation with the US's help in international affairs. The first event we'll be talking about is the Panama Canal, which occurred during the decade of the 1900s. Although the benefit of building a canal through Panama was recognized by many foreign powers at the time, the Colombian government, which then owned Panama, was the first to call for the construction of the canal. They granted concession to a privately owned company titled Compagnie Universelle des Canaux Interoceaniques. It was a French finance company, and the project was put in the hands of Ferdinand de Lesseps. But his ideas towards the engineering of the canal weren't taken into consideration, and therefore the building of the canal ended up being very time consuming and very slow. The US then came forward with the Spooner Act in 1902, which would purchase the French company should they achieve peaceful negotiations with Colombia. However, these negotiations soon had started to fall through, and Panama took this as an opportunity to declare its independence from Colombia with the support of the US. After the construction of the canal, it was recognized as a feat made possible by the US, and because of this power, they came to the agreement not to take over any land surrounding Panama, even though they had the power to. The next major event is World War I, which occurred during the 1910s. When the war first ensued, it was mainly a conflict involving the foreign powers within Europe. While the US was very aware that this war was starting to get out of hand, it maintained a position of neutrality, which was then put forth by the president at the time, Woodrow Wilson. However, during this state of neutrality, the US still continued to keep up its trade relations with Europe, continuing to give and receive goods. However, the final straw was when a boat titled Lusitania that was traveling from New York to Liverpool at the time, carrying hundreds of American passengers, was sunk by the European powers. This created widespread protests within the US Congress, as well as other American citizens who were outraged at what they thought was an unprovoked attack against the US. Because of this, a call for retaliation had been started, with fervor rising within the US. Then, Congress finally came out with a declaration of war against Germany. The war finally came to an end towards an armistice when, in 1919, at the Paris Peace Conference, the Allied powers and Germany, although reluctantly, signed the Treaty of Versailles, officially ending the state of war.
In the 1940s, as World War II began, the US continued to maintain its neutrality while helping its allies at the same time. An example of this was the cash and carry policy, which allowed the belligerent countries to buy US arms, favoring Great Britain in particular. Furthermore, President Roosevelt proposed to replace the cash and carry with the Lend-Lease Act, which permitted Britain to obtain US arms more easily. Despite the opposition of US isolationists, the majority agreed to pass the act. In justification, Roosevelt stated that the US must help protect the four freedoms, being the freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. The political cartoon shown here criticizes the US pouring huge amounts of shipment into Britain. Overall, the act allowed the US to be more openly involved in military supplement during the war. Another example of the USA's active foreign policy is shown by the formation of the United Nations. Attempting to preserve global peace, the US and Britain proposed the creation of a peacekeeping organization known as the United Nations, and this was put into place immediately after the war. The picture above shows the gathering of representatives from 50 nations drafting a charter. The United States' involvement in the UN shows how America had a great interest in policing global affairs. The USA's active foreign policy is also illustrated through the Cold War. The Cold War reached its peak in the 1960s during the Cuban Missile Crisis. This crisis all began when the Soviet Union secretly deployed missiles in Cuba in order to counteract the US missiles in Turkey and Italy. When the US found out about this missile construction, it warned the Soviet Union, announcing that the US would place a naval quarantine that would block any USSR shipments to Cuba. However, the USSR saw this naval blockade as an act of aggression and openly ignored the warning, claiming that the missiles were only for defensive measures. In response, the US set itself to DEFCON 2, which is one step below nuclear war. The political cartoon above shows President Kennedy and Khrushchev arm wrestling, which highlights the high tensions between the two countries, neither one easily backing out. Thankfully, Through a secret meeting of a US Attorney General and a Soviet ambassador, they were able to arrive at an agreement. The condition stated, while the Soviet Union withdraw from Cuba under UN inspection, the US must retrieve their nuclear missiles from both Turkey and Italy and pledge to never attack Cuba again. Even though the Cold War did not end, the Cuban Missile Crisis was resolved in peace. Overall, the early to mid 20th century was centered around world wars and conflicts between different ideologies, which were communism, led by the Soviets, versus democracy that was backed by the United States.
After this, in the late 20th century, this would lead to conflict over resources, specifically oil, resulting in actions enacted by the government, such as the OPEC oil embargo. Thank you.